What's that mean? Don't what? Don't allow a witch to stay alive. Now, what does that mean? If I see a witch, I'm supposed to put her to death? No, is this an absolute law or a case law? It's very different than everything till now, right? Anyone sleeping with an animal is put to death. These laws are very strange, aren't they? They're not like all the other ones. But what I want to suggest here is these sort of are case. It's a case. Should there be a witch, to execute her? Should someone sleep with an animal? Don't put the animal to death. You put the person to death. Okay? But these are laws up until now. Baiting is very passive, and people come to bait if someone claims the damage was done to him. He has financial loss due to someone else's behavior or action or property. Then they go to baiting, and baiting decides. Remember, we stick with tzaddik, b'yeshuat rasha. Baiting decides who owes money to who. The plaintiff, all the classic stuff. But baiting sits at the gate of the city and makes those decisions. What's happening here? What's happening here is baiting has to be proactive, because no one's going to go to baiting and complain about a machshefa. You know why? Because everyone's scared of witches. It could be. No, there's certain things baiting has to be proactive. The animal's not going to come complain that someone slept with the animal, with me. Got it? Therefore, baiting has to be, there's certain things that usually baiting is passive, and people come to baiting and they decide. In these two cases, it has to do with society. Are they between God and man? Between man and man, you can argue. But I'm saying these two are a bit of a transition, and we'll leave them alone for now. Now, they have a law which is clearly between God and man. That for sure is like the first category. That's Beinad Makom. You can't bring a sacrifice to God except if it's Yud Ke Vav Ke. Let me just check the chat real fast. Okay. And then we have a sudden change in style. Watch what happens now. Okay. V'ger lo toneh. That it's not should this happen, brother. Don't wrong a stranger and don't oppress him. Why? Because you were strangers in Egypt. Now, if we weren't strangers in Egypt, would it be okay? And it's okay to cheat someone who's not a stranger, but strangers are typically easier to oppress. I'll give you an example. Rashi claims machshefa also applies to a wizard, to a male witch. But because witchcraft is usually practiced by females, it's called diber katuv b'lashon hoveh. The pasuk gives classic examples, what usually happens. So same here, you can cheat anybody, but it's very easy to cheat a stranger. And you of all people shouldn't do it because you were strangers in Egypt. And you have to learn from your experience. We talked about before, echoes of the Exodus. The same thing applies to a widow or an orphan. Don't oppress them. If they do cry out, they're not going to go to baiting, and baiting really, and you can legally oppress them. Like you can find a loophole in something legal. But if you do that, baiting can't punish you. But when they cry out to me, God will hear their cry, and I hear already echo of prayer here. Don't see that? What does that imply? That God does answer prayer. Maybe not your prayer, but someone else's prayer. In other words, someone else praying might damage you. But you see already a little bit of a hint to a concept here of prayer. And remember where it comes out? Right in this opening section. We'll look at in the Parshat division later on. In this opening section of the second half of the law section, we have already at least a hint that God hears prayer. And that's going to affect you as well. Okay, then what happens next? Then should you lend money? And Chazal say this is not should you, but you must. It's called chovah, not just reshut. But when you lend money, don't take interest, remember? And don't put interest on them, and don't lean on them as a creditor. If you take a collateral of something they need, make sure to return it at the right time, because that's what needs to cover himself. Basically, you should lend money, don't take interest, and when you take a collateral, don't take something that people need to sleep with, something that's important to them. Even though the whole idea of a collateral is taking something that's important to make sure you get your money back, but be nice to them. And even though you might not get your money back, lend them anyhow. Basically, be kind and nice. Baiting can't take you to court if you charge interest, correct? If I'm not mistaken. I can't go to baiting, oh, he charged me interest on a loan. You're not allowed to take interest on a loan. You can't charge interest, but it's not something the baiting can punish you for. But what will happen? Should the person cry out to God, hey, I don't have what to sleep with because I don't have a blanket, I have clothing because this loan shark took my money. Out here, again, I have echoes not just of the Exodus, but also of there's implicit here, there's a concept of prayer. Okay. Then it says, don't curse a judge. Remember earlier, Elohim is a name for Beit Din because they're representing God. And don't curse a political leader. Chazal understand this is paying your taxes, paying Trumot Masrot and Bechor basic time. And we have a general principle, Anshe Kodesh. One details what that means. Look in Parshat Doshim to you, which is primarily between God and man, between man and man again. And also, one strange law about if there's a dead animal on the street, don't eat it. It's basically it could be laws of kashrut, but also eat. I think it's probably part of etiquette because you're God's people. Don't if an animal gets run over on the street, don't sit down and eat it. Feed it to the dogs. But if you're gonna eat meat, do it in a proper setting. But then it continues in Perachab Gimel. I'm going to show you the transition. Laws for Beit Din, majority rule, and not playing favorites. And then this is just returning lost items. But I could do two things here. I see someone's animal, someone I hate. He voted for a different political party or something. There was someone I can't stand him. He's my enemy. So I know who the animal belongs to. So it's not a lost item, but the animal is getting lost. And I have two choices. I can't keep it for myself. That's stealing. But what could I do? I could just look the other way and let it continue and wander. I can do nothing, or I can return it to him. Chumash says you have to return it to him. But if you don't, Beit Din can't take you to court. Beit Din can't say, oh, you could have returned the lost item and therefore you have to pay him. No way. This is about good behavior and it's absolute law. It's something you must do. And if there's animals under distress and you have to pick up the things that fell down, even though you hate Gadai, you have to go and help them. There's famous laws, right? Not to wrong someone in judgment. Just because he's poor doesn't mean he did something wrong. And then bidvar sheker terchak. Sometimes you need to lie, but if you need to, do it sparingly, only when it's really necessary. Not to take bribes, and it can even maybe back. I'm not sure if it applies nowadays. But back then, people actually judges made decisions based on bribes they got from other people. I'm pretty sure it doesn't apply anymore because no one would do something like that anymore nowadays. So I'm just joking again. Now look how this ends. We repeat, "V'ger lo techatz," don't oppress a stranger, and you know what it feels like to be a stranger. That's probably the strongest line of them all. Right? We had this before, but we're repeating what we said before. Don't oppress a stranger, and you of all people know what it feels like to be a stranger, because you were strangers in Egypt. And then we have the laws of Shemitah, which is a share in itself. But the reason here for Shemitah is not because the land needs to rest, but your workers, for the poor people, once a week you have to rest. Yes, they have Shabbat. Why? So your workers have a day of rest. And stranger. And now listen to Pasuk Yud Gimel. Nice and big. Remember this. No, make everything I just told you. That's a summary. And don't you dare mention the names of other gods. And then Sholosh Regalim Tchogli Bashana, Sholosh Regalim. Got that? Now, and that's the end of the laws. We have Sholosh Regalim, Chag Aviv, Chetzach, Chag Ketzir, and Chag Asif, the three agricultural holidays, what we call Sholosh Regalim. And what do you do on the Sholosh Regalim? You have to be seen by God. You basically come to the Beit HaMikdash and celebrate or bring sacrifices. And don't bring chametz. Right? Don't sacrifice korban pesach, right? When having chametz, and like laws of kosher, basically, bringing your first fruits to God. That's a law for Shavuot, and then what's up to a Sukkot? A different share. That ends the law section. Got it? And then we have a promise about coming to Israel. Now, what I'm going to talk about here is Pasuk Yud Gimel. Pasuk Yud Gimel is no doubt a summary, right? This will be key to the whole point we're going to develop now. I just went through the laws. I'm going to build on this pasuk right here. This is a summary. Agreed? It should be at the very end. Instead, it's a transition, right? Before the Sholosh Regalim. Because Don't remember to keep all these things. Don't you dare mention the names of other gods. Who are these other gods? Who are the other gods we might mention who are in competition with our God? What I want to say is Pasuk Yud Gimel summarizes everything up until now, but also is a transition to Shalosh Regalim. Notice the Shalosh Regalim are all agricultural. Chag HaMatzot when Chodesh Aviv. Understand? It's a spring holiday. Chag HaKatzir, that's the end of your grain harvest. And Chag HaSeif, the end of your fruit harvest. The beginning of the rainy season. Chag HaKatzir, the end of your grain, beginning of your fruit. Chag Aviv is the beginning of your grain harvest. And that's your staple. And these three critical times of the year, God wants you in his office. Why? Because we're about to go into Canaan. And what happened in Canaan? In Canaan, there's many gods, aren't there? Who did the Canaanites serve? The Canaanites didn't have a Nile god that the Egyptians had because they need the Nile River. In Egypt, in Canaan, the water comes from the rain. They need a rain god. Maybe there's even a snow god, but they had a rain god. And they had a fertility god, Asherah, who makes sure the crops grow properly. And there's a grain god called Dagon. Basically, all the different powers of nature, which Chumash refers to as Elohim, many gods, are what the Canaanite people served. Watch what Chumash is telling us here. What's it saying? It's only natural. In every society, people want prosperity. People need food on the table. People need the grain to grow. And if you're a farmer, and that's your food for the rest of the year, that grain season, or your fruits, you're going to dry them out, that's going to feed you through the winter. And I need my olives for oil. But if I need agriculture to work for me, I can be the best farmer, but certain things are out of my control. How much it rains is out of my control. How well the crops grow is out of my control. If there'll be wild animals coming and eating it, out of my control. Insects, locusts. There's so many things out of my control, but they must be in someone's control. And therefore, there's a whole, theology of idol worship where there's different powers of nature. And I can pray to the rain god and I can pray to the fertility god, but I pray to them when I need them. And therefore, what do you do as a farmer? You work your best to be a good farmer, but you pray to the rain god, you get rain at the right time. You pray to the fertility god that the crops grow properly. Got my point? No. What's Chumash come and tell you? That number one, that's not true. There's only one God, not many gods. All those powers, there are powers of nature. That's the first topic of Chumash, isn't it? That's creation. That what appears to be many powers, Elohim, is really one power, Elohim. And he created everything, including man. But Chumash continues to tell you that the way that God treats nature is a function of man's deeds. Agreed? So Chumash isn't telling you, don't pray to those gods, pray to your God, and he'll give you rain. But that's my key point. What's the transition point? Keep all the laws they just told you in Parshat Mishpatim, which are primarily between man and his fellow man, as we saw. And then, like we say every day in Shema Tishbu, then Chumash is saying something revolutionary in religion, that it's not prayer to a God that's going to bring prosperity, but it's your behavior as a society that'll bring prosperity. Again, at the group level. And therefore, I need to pray to God, but not to pray for rain. I pray to God to be worthy of rain. So prayer comes in two steps. I need to remember there's one God, not many gods. And not I turn God directly, oh, give me rain. I know you're in charge, give me rain. Oh, you're so great. But you need to remember that God is in charge and he can decide yes or no. But God's decision is dependent on our behavior as a society. Is that point clear? Now, that's revolutionary when it comes to religion. In my opinion, that's the main difference between Judaism and idol worship. It's what they call, I think it's the essence of ethical monotheism, where it's not just believing, question how many gods there are, but rather believing that there's one God, but that one God is in charge of all the powers of nature, that his hashgacha, his providence over the powers of nature is not only a function of prayer, but it's a function of deeds. Now, I need to remember that, and now I'm touching on the most fundamental point of prayer. It's called transformative prayer, that prayer should lead to better behavior. It's not just prayer, it's not just stating my sincere belief in God. I know you're great and everything. That's part of it. But also the understanding, not only that God is in charge, but that you have to be worthy of his help. Now, and if that's true, that'll make a much better society. Now, let's take a look and summarize everything we saw so far. I have a little chart here. I hope you can see it. You can print it out later on. Let me just go over what we just did. Okay, we saw the change in the middle of chapter 22, and then we went from different types of laws. We had one little law between man and God smack in the middle in 22:19, and then remember, and then we had a transition. And now the word key is the reason, not the case. And from here, God punishes, not man. But the second unit we just saw is also between man and his fellow man. And then we had two sets of laws. We had case law in the first section and absolute law in the second section. And God enforces and not man. Okay. And then we had, we'll talk about this match in a minute. And we talked about the echoes. Okay. Now, and then we did the transition in the last psukim we just read. Now, here's what we just talked about. The last law about, ethical law and being kind and sensitive is don't impress a stranger. You know what it feels like to be a stranger. Followed by, let me make this a little bit bigger. A little bit bigger. Here we go. And then we saw, we had laws of Shabbat, Shemitah, and Shabbat. And everything I told you, Klav Marte is going back and summarizing the whole unit beforehand. Don't mention other gods. Shalosh Regalim. Okay. Now, so here's a little. Oh, now I have to make it real. I'm going to make this real small first, and then make it bigger. Hope you can see my screen, and I'll make it bigger and smaller. And I don't know how I'm going to do this, but I'll try. Okay, this goes here, and I can make it a lot smaller. But okay, I think now you see the whole thing. You'll see what I'm doing here in a minute. This is the whole shir we just did. And let me get my little pointer. And here we are. I'll use a little arrow, is good. And a red arrow. Okay. So this here, yellow, is between God and man. That's how to build a mizbeach, basically how to serve God on a mizbeach. This is how not to serve God with the mizbeach and what God you should serve on the mizbeach. And the last thing is serving God on the agricultural holidays, bringing sacrifices to God or serving God. What I'm getting, it begins, middle, and end is between God and man, which is classic religion with sacrifice, isn't it? This is about mizbeach. This is about mizbeach, and it doesn't say the word. It says mizbeach at the end. But when you go to be seen by God, you bring. We know later on, you bring korbanot on the Shalosh Regalim and the Beit HaMikdash. So, and that's classic religion. Every religion, you bring sacrifices to your gods. That's what religion is about in ancient times. So this whole section is enveloped by between God and man, and in the middle has a delimiter between God and man. But in between, we have two sections, the blue section and the green section. Got that? Now, let's pick this in yellow one. No, we don't yellow, we want, let's see, purple should be good. Okay, it should be good. We have this section over here, which is the whole, like called the Hammurabi section or the case law, which is basically Choshev Mishpat, which is not a chiddush to Judaism. Every society has laws like these. Every society has laws about nezikin, about damages, and a court system. But God's giving us guidelines about a just court system where there's equality between every society, even if he's a slave or a worker. And making sure that there's justice and making sure that everyone's responsible for their actions, even if it causes indirect damage. Okay. Then we have another section over here, the green section, which doesn't go to baiting, but it's more ethical behavior. First, not to be a rotten person, number one, got to hear their cry. Also, be a good person, lend money and don't take interest. And be a kind person, even returning things of lost items, and not to take bribes, taking away from. What I'm getting at is the whole green section is all about ethical behavior. And notice, let me make it a drop bigger now. Notice it begins and ends with what? Vigir I hope we see that still. Vigir lo tochatz, but no, it ends with, it begins, the second section begins with because you were slaves in Egypt, and ends with you were slaves in Egypt. Meaning, we're going to redeem our collective suffering and turn into an educational experience, which is what the Seder is about. And that's why we remember the Exodus every day, not to remember what happened, but why it happened, and how that memory, the Exodus, has to affect our behavior as people. Now, so this structure, what I'm trying to show you is you learn not just from the text, but from the context. And the transition pasuk, I think, is the most important. That's what we made the big deal about here. The purple one. We made a big deal about it before. Sorry. Yeah, this one. The transition. The transition pasuk. Keep all these things here, meaning if you want rain at your right time, if you want God to help you, make sure you keep this entire, make sure you keep this entire section in the middle. Got it? Keep all that, and then God will bless you and bless your land. I'm going to show you this inside, and then we'll get to, and we'll get to the chiyuv to daven. I hope you understand that the chart I made. The chart is simply showing you Parshat Mishpatim is not just a collection of laws. It's a beautifully presented structure, an envelope structure with two sections, right? That are the. Remember I talked about why did these laws called the Ten Commandments? It's it's sort of a summary, or synopsis, like almost sound bites of what Judaism is about. It's for sure it's between God and man, but the main way you serve God is not by sacrifices, but by the society that you build. Now, let me clear all these stories here. I want to add one little thing here. I'm not sure if it's right, but it's a nice idea. It could be that I could call this whole section here Mishpat, because it's Mishpatim. And this section here, I'm going to call Tzedakah. You understand why? Because that's ethical, like doing what's right. Now, if that's true, then this whole section is simply let me share, and I lost all my things. Here we go. If that's true, if these two sections surrounded by serving God, or one section Mishpat, one Tzedakah, I have a beautiful application of the famous pasuk in Sefer Bereshit of why we were chosen in the first place. Where does that go back to? Everyone remembers from the story of Sodom, where, remember, God is willing to save Sodom if there's at least a small group of righteous people who will, who care about injustice. Remember, God says, I have to share with Avram my deliberation, should not destroy Sodom, because Avram is going to become a great nation one day. It'll bring blessing to all people. How would that happen? Because I came to know him, ki dativ, so that he would command his children and they their children, v'shamru et derech Hashem, to follow the ways of God by doing tzedakah mishpat, in order that God's goal for Avram will be fulfilled. And right afterwards, God's got to say, there's a cry of oppression coming from Sodom, and their sin is great, and God's got to go down and check it out. Now, God could punish, but if people in Sodom are willing to do better, he can save them. So Avram has to understand that. He can't save Sodom, but he has to understand and teach that to his children about how they can bring blessing by being God's model nation. So I think if that's true, then the way the laws are presented are a nice little application of the purpose of Avram being chosen to do what's right and do justice. And that theme comes up all through Nevi'im all the time. In fact, if you just almost all Yeshayahu, Yirmiyah always say, if you're not doing Mishpat and Tzedakah, your prayers, remember Lamedi Rob Sivchechem, if you remember Perak Aleph in Sefer Yeshayahu, which I'm sure you're familiar with. Now, what's this have to do with davening? Let's go now to that final section where God makes a promise, and we'll see where the Rambam learns davening from. Let's go back to our source sheet and make it bigger. A lot bigger, babam. They should have shared the source sheet with you. You can print it out at home. And sorry, I had the pasuk right here about why God chose Avram before destroying Sodom. Now, we're still in the Kol Tomar unit. We finished the law section, and the law section is followed by a promise because we're about to go to Israel. Had not been for the sin of the golden calf, we could have gone right to Israel from Har Sinai after a couple more laws. And therefore, God promises the people, I'm going to send a malach, an angel, or a messenger, which could have been Moshe, we'll see, to lead you in the way, to guard you, and bring you al makom asher achinoti, which is such a great way to describe the land of Israel, the place that God made ready for us to be his people. God planned the land of Israel to be a place where we can become that nation. But then it says, I'm willing to come and help you conquer the land. On what condition? Be careful. Listen to what this malach, assuming someone like Moshe, who's going to command you, okay? Because my malach, he can't forgive sin. He can't carry away sin. I can't tolerate misbehavior. Why? Kim shema tishma b'kolo. If you do what he says in my name and do hence what I'm saying, then your enemies will be my enemies and your adversaries will be mine. Meaning, I'll help you conquer the land. I'll bring you to the land of the 7 nations and help you conquer it. Now listen carefully. When you come and conquer the land and I'm helping you and you're keeping my laws, don't bow down to their gods. Don't bow down to their gods and don't serve them. What's that mean? Don't serve them. Don't. Where's my little thing? Don't serve their gods. Got it? And don't act like they do. Destroy their places of worship. Instead, serve your God instead. Now, a simple shot means don't bring sacrifices to their gods. Instead, bring sacrifices to your God. It's a simple understanding, because what did they do? Destroy their places of worship. Remember their matzevot and their izbachot and all the things, the way they worship their God. And serve your God instead means it seems like replace, maybe not replace, but don't serve their God, serve your God. Now, it's this pasuk right here, this pasuk we just circled, this one right here, is the Rambam's source for why we're chayiv to daven. Now, what do people usually daven for? People usually daven for prosperity, for food, for wealth, for health. Listen what God says. What will happen if you serve God properly? Right? If you serve God, all the things people pray for are followed by this phrase. Serve your God. God will bless what? Will bless your bread, that's food, your water, it's your health. You won't be, I'll make sure there won't be pandemics and sickness and people will be healthy. You won't have miscarriages. People get pregnant and have children. Okay. You'll live a long life. You'll beat your enemies. You'll win your enemies, defeat them. You'll have peace in the land afterwards. Got it? Basically, what follows this line here are all the things people pray for. Now, what I want to claim, let me show you now. It's this pasuk. Remember I asked you in the beginning of the share, where does Chumash say thou shalt daven? According to Rambam, Maimonides, who knows his Chumash, his claim, it's this pasuk right here. I'll circle it again just to make sure it's super clear. This pasuk right here. That's a chiyuv d'oraita to daven. And avodah here doesn't mean sacrifice, it means prayer. Which doesn't sound like pshat, but the Rambam says it's a chiyuv d'oraita based on this pasuk. Then now we'll see the Rambam inside. So the drawings, take a look. Rambam Hilchot Tefillah. The very first halakha in Hilchot Tefillah. This is what he says. Mitzvah say, let me make this bigger. Okay, there we go. Okay, I'm sorry. Rambam Hilchot Tefillah. Mitzvah say ditpaleh b'chol yom shenemar v'avaratem et Hashem Elohechem. That should surprise everybody, right? No one in their right mind ever thought that pasuk in Parshat Mishpatim is a chiyuv to daven. That's our pasuk. Shmot Chav Gimel Chafei. According to the Rambam, that's our chiyuv d'oraita to daven. I didn't say pray. He says mipi hashmoa, which in my opinion means deep. That's super duper pshuto shemikra. It's a thematic understanding of Tanakh. Lomdu shavodah zu tefillah. This avodah is referring to prayer. But if you follow the entire section we saw before, it makes perfect sense, because that's what people pray for. Okay? And that prayer, what we said before, and then now we need a definition. I don't need the pasuk that defines the obligation. I need a pasuk that defines the meaning of the word. I need to prove that in the dictionary, if I look up a Hebrew dictionary, a biblical dictionary, that the word la'avod doesn't always mean sacrifice. It doesn't always mean working the field. Sometimes it can mean, avodah might mean prayer, because we see later on there's a concept of avodah shebalev. How can your heart work? So let me show you something. We do this by heart, but I'll just open up a chumash to show you. Remember in Sefer Dvarim, we have the Parshat of Kriyat Shema. Let me open up a Tanakh real fast. Here we go. This one, we're in Sefer Dvarim, right? Sefer Dvarim Perikid Aleph, the famous Shema. Again, agriculture. Remember the land you're coming to. The Mtar Shemaim Tishtamayim, that needs rain. God looks over the land. And then Baya, Im Shema Tishmu El Mitzvotei. If you follow my laws, which I'm commanding you in Sefer Dvarim, to what? To love God. And do what? Ulovdo b'chol levavchem v'chol nafshechem. You have to serve God with all your heart and all your soul. So what do we see from here? It's possible to serve God with your heart. What does Chazal understand? How do you serve God with your heart? It's by prayer. But what's prayer doing? Prayer is remembering exactly this principle of Shema, that what? If you keep my mitzvot of Sefer Dvarim, and of course Parshat Mishpatim, my laws of building a just society and being God's model nation, then v'natati mitartzchem bito Yoram Makosh. There isn't a rain God. There isn't a fertility God. There's one God who's in charge of that. But he gives you that prosperity based on your behavior, based on keeping the laws of Dvarim and Mishpatim and Kedoshim to you. And therefore, be careful if you go astray and not serve other gods and bring them. But if you believe in these other gods, meaning you think that God work for you, and you can get rain by praying to a rain God, but don't fix your society. Don't realize that it's a function of your society you build. Then God will get really angry and throw you out of the land. I'll hold back the rain, and you have to learn the hard way. And therefore, teach these laws. Remember, put a sign, remind all the time. And if you do that, then you can stay in the land for a long time. Not you, the person, you, the nation, can remain in the land forever because you're doing my job. If not, I'll have to send you into exile. And then if you do that, remember God to help you get rid of those enemies, all the famous stuff, and then ends the mitzvah section of Sefer Dvarim. So back to the Rambam now, and look at what the Rambam's saying. Rambam's saying it's a mitzvah to say to pray, because the pasuk Mishpatim, my claim is not just that one pasuk by itself. The pasuk in its context of what God rewards you with afterwards, based on its context of the whole unit of laws, the 3 chapters of laws, which says, based on what will God give you prosperity, based on keeping these laws of Mishpatim, of doing Mishpat and Tzedakah at a national level. And then I learned from the Shema, which I call Pshuto Shemikra, that serving God with your heart is tefillah. And we saw that underlying echo of prayer, not just echoes of the Exodus, the idea of prayer, especially in that second section of law, that God hears the cry of the oppressed. Okay? Therefore, Amru Chachamim, Eiz avodah shabalev zo tefillah. I think that's a super deep understanding of what Chumash is about, based both on Parshat Mishpatim and also based on the section in Dvarim. And because of that, this is a way of life. I can't say if I'm chayav to daven a certain time of day, then it seems something technical. Saying this understanding is a way of life, and therefore it's not the need to prayer has nothing to do with time. Therefore, ein minyan tefillah min Torah. That's how many times you have to daven. Rambam didn't say you have to daven once a day. You're always in a status you need to daven. Okay? And how to daven? The Torah didn't say how to daven. It doesn't have a set time or anything. And that's why women are chayiv, because it's not a mitzvah taseh shazman grama. You're always chayiv to daven. How you daven, when you daven, that the rabbi set frameworks. So rabbinically, once a day is enough. But the concept that you're always in a status that you're in need of prayer, it's a way of life. It's a frame of mind knowing. Now, it's not only knowing that you have to be a good person to receive help. You have to be a good society. And that's going to cause you, let's say, I'll give you the analogy from global warming. It's a big topic today. Let's say you believe that global warming can cause tidal waves and terrible destruction, but you could stop it by recycling. If everyone recycled, 90% of people recycle, we can stop it. What happens if 20% of the people recycle? That's not enough. So let's say 20% of the people recycle and it doesn't work and there's a tidal wave. When the tidal wave comes, it's not going to differentiate between the people who recycled and the people who didn't. Agreed? Now, when nature strikes, it doesn't differentiate between the tzaddik and the rasha. And that means it's not enough for you to be a tzaddik. It's not enough for you to recycle. You have to convince other people they need to recycle. You have to be involved in legislation and politics, whatever you have to do. But if you see injustice or something, if using that analogy, it's not enough for you just to be, I'm okay. Maybe between you and God in your own personal olam haba, but on a national level. Remember, God's reward and punishment in Chumash is on a national level. That's going to cause people not only for themselves to be good, it'll cause them to be involved in society and take leadership. for them to be a role model and to maybe be involved in leadership in society to make other people better as well, not just give up on them. Which is, I can show you this psukim later in Yecheskel, that even someone like, remember, like even Eov, and Daniel couldn't save a city when things are bad. So, so let me just end with the end of the Rambam here. The Rambam finishes. So the mitzvah is what he called that a person always turns to God and prays. Before you do shevach beforehand, and then you ask your needs, and then you say thank you. And this is a great line. If you were verbose and know how to compose good tefillot, daven as long as you want. Bima yaras fatayim. If you basically don't know how to pray well, you can say as much as you can, and that's enough. Okay, it was up until Ezra, until they were taking tefillah, but calling someone who doesn't know how to daven well, isn't verbose, and can't get the words out right, he calls him a ras fatayim. Everyone sees why. That goes back to Moshe Rabbeinu being our greatest davener, and he says about himself he's a ras fatayim. And then he goes on afterwards. You can read the Rechot Tefillah that once we went into exile and God saw that or the Rabbi saw that people don't know Hebrew anymore. So Ezra and Beitino were metaking how to daven. Now, what I end with real quickly, look at the Ramban. Ramban agrees that there's a chiyuv to daven, Beit Sarah. In this pasuk, which is a share in itself, we're not going to. Just want to show you where it comes from. He goes to Sefer Bamidbar. Where's that? Bamidbar Perek Yud, in the context of Chatzotzrot. Again, it's a different angle, but he says, should war be imminent in your land? Whoever the enemy might be, we're supposed to blow shofar, post the trumpets, remember God, okay? And he'll save you from your enemies. Of all the psukim, I think this is even more far-fetched than the Rambam, right? It says, does this pasuk say you're chayiv to daven? According to Ramban, it says you're chayiv to daven in a time of trouble. How does he understand this? When you're in trouble in your land, war be imminent, you have to blow shofar not to wake God up, to wake yourselves up. You have to remember that God is judging you based on your deeds. And if you remember properly, God will come and save you. But there's a lot of depth behind this because it's all implying that blowing shofar is not going to wake God up, it's going to wake yourselves up. You're going to remember that if there's a war, God's sending the war as a wake-up call because of your bad behavior. And then you're going to take upon yourself to do proper tshuva, and then God will help you. That's definitely not the simple meaning of the pasuk unless you read the rest of Chumash. So what I'm trying to show you, that pasuk is another example of the Rabbi saying, the source of davening, I need a pasuk. So we take a pasuk that reflects the concept of davening, even though the pasuk didn't say thou shalt daven. No pasuk says thou shalt, but when I study Chumash and look at its context and its theme and its ideas, especially in later Parshat Mishpatim, then you understand that of course you have to daven. It's only logical based on the theme of Chumash. Because the belief that that God, now he created, he has providence, he looks over. Remember, Tamid Einei Hashem Elokecha ba. God looks over us from the beginning, end of all the seasons. But he gives us rain based on our deeds. So that understanding, that internal understanding, is a frame of mind that we have to be in all the time, which will be transformative, will make you a better person. And when you daven, you have to remember that. Not only that God, yes, he can help you, but you have to be deserving of his help. And it's not only about just you and God, but it's about we and God as a society, and that we have the idea of hashgacha at the group level, as not only at the individual level, also at the group level. So, my summarize, that's my key point, is that we're chayiv to daven, but we're not chayiv to daven because a pasuk says so. We're chayiv to daven because Chumash says so. At the most widest thematic level, and the first set of laws that come part and parcel with the Ten Commandments, when you look at its structure and that summary pasuk, everything I told you, keep. And based on that, right, I'll bless your land. And if I'm going to send a malach to help you, but I'll help you conquer your enemies. If you keep these laws, you understand where the Rambam's coming from? If Chumash just said, I'll help you defeat your enemies in war, if you keep all my mitzvot, you understand why the Rambam applies that to Parshat Sefer Bamidbar with the Chatzotzrot, when war is imminent. You blow shofar and remember that God judges you based on your behavior. So the Rambam statement, where it says "V'harotem v'niskartem lifnei Hashem Elokechem," it's not based on what that pasuk says. It's based on its context and what we saw in Parshat Mishpatim, and also later on in Sefer Dvarim. Sefer Dvarim takes the same idea and just expands it in much more detail. Okay, no, my time's up now. If you have any questions, I'll take questions now real fast. But otherwise, our time is up. Okay. But next year's at 10:30, I think. Okay, so you guys need a break. Any questions? I'll be happy to answer. I'll stand for another minute. Otherwise, enjoy the snow. I have to go get my grandkids out. Okay, thank you.
I think I'll go daven.
אוקיי, תודה רבה, שבת שלום.
תודה, כן, ביי ביי.
תרגיש חם.
תודה.